Leonard Lake, not to be confused with Lake Leonard, was an American serial killer. During the mid-1980s, he and his accomplice Charles Ng sexually assaulted, tortured, and murdered 11 to 25 victims in a remote cabin near the Sierra Nevada foothills, located 150 miles east of San Francisco. Lake was born in San Francisco, California. When he was 6 years old, his parents separated, whereupon he and his siblings moved in with their maternal grandmother. Lake was reportedly a bright child, but after habitually photographing his sisters nude, which his grandmother encouraged, he became obsessed with pornography. He then extorted his sisters to perform sexual acts. Lake also collected mice and killed them by dissolving them in chemicals. In the same manner, he would later dissolve his human victim corpses. After attending school, Lake enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1964. He served 2 tours of duty in the Vietnam War as a radar electronics technician. During this period, Lake was first diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. After what was termed a delusional breakdown in Da Nang, he received psychotherapy and in 1971 received a medical discharge. Lake settled in San Jose and became enamored in the hippie lifestyle in San Francisco. He moved to a commune there and married briefly in 1975. The marriage dissolved after his wife discovered that he was making and appearing in amateur pornographic movies, usually involving bondage or sadomasochism. For the next 8 years, Lake lived at the Greenfield Ranch, a 5,600-acre back-to-the-land settlement. There he met and eventually married Caroline Ballas, who became involved in Lake's fantasies and appeared in many of his pornographic films. Lake's growing fear of the impending nuclear holocaust prompted him to begin construction of a bunker on the settlement grounds, until the owner of the property became aware of the project and ordered it halted. Charles Ng was born in British Hong Kong, the youngest of 3 children and also son of a wealthy executive and his wife. As a child, Ng was harshly disciplined and abused by his father. As a teenager, he was described as a troubled loner and was expelled from several schools. After he was arrested at age 15, his father sent him to a boarding school in England. Not long after arriving, Ng was expelled for stealing from other students and returned back to Hong Kong. Ng moved to the United States on a student visa in 1978. He dropped out after 1 semester. Soon after, he was involved in a hit-and-run accident, and to avoid prosecution, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. Ng joined the Marines in October 1979 with the help of a recruiting sergeant and false documents attesting to his birthplace in Indiana. After less than a year of service, he was arrested by military police for stealing automatic weapons from the base armory. Facing court-martial, Ng escaped custody in 1980 and made his way back to the Northern California area, where he had met Leonard Lake. Leonard Lake had placed an ad looking for his next victim, but instead he found an accomplice. In 1982, federal authorities raided the mobile home Ng and Lake shared in California, seizing a large stash of illegal weapons and explosives. Lake was released on bond, but he jumped bail and hid at a remote cabin owned by his wife, Caroline Ballas, in Wilseyville, located in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Ng was returned to the Marines' custody and pleaded guilty to the charges of theft and desertion. Under the terms of his plea bargain, he was paroled and dishonorably discharged in 1984 after serving 18 months in the military stockades at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. After his release from Leavenworth, Ng rejoined Lake, who was still living in the Wilseyville cabin. By then, Lake and Ballas had divorced, but remained on good terms. Next to the cabin, Lake had built a structure described in his journals as a dungeon. Before Ng's arrival, Lake murdered his own brother, Donald, whom he lured to the cabin and shot him in his sleep in 1983, and killed his friend and best man, Charles Gunner. Gunner's body was unearthed from the Wilseyville property in 1998. Over the next year, Lake and Ng began a pattern of kidnapping and murder of men, women, and children. They would kill the men and infants immediately, whereas they would subject women to periods of enslavement, sexual brutality, and torture before killing them. In July 1984, an Asian man broke into and robbed the apartment of Don Giletti, a San Francisco DJ, and his roommate Richard Carrazza, shooting both men in the process. Giletti died in the attack, but Carrazza survived and later identified Ng as the assailant. Soon afterward, Ng managed to get a job at the Bay Area Moving Company. The duo's rampage might have gone on longer were it not for Ng's kleptomania. On June 2, 1985, Lake and Ng entered the South City lumber store in South San Francisco. An employee observed Ng stealing a $75 vise and called the police. When confronted by the employee, Ng tossed the vise into the trunk of a 1980 Honda Prelude in the parking lot, then fled on foot. The police arrived minutes later. An officer looked into the car's trunk and saw the stolen vise, along with a .22 caliber pistol, equipped with an illegal silencer. Lake insisted there was a misunderstanding and that he had paid for the vise. He was arrested for possession of the illegally modified weapon. The arresting officer noticed that Lake bore no resemblance to the photo on his driver's license, which had the name Robert Scott Stapley. A San Diego man reported missing by his family several weeks earlier. The Honda was registered to Paul Costner, who disappeared from San Francisco on November 2, 1984, after leaving his apartment to show the car to someone interested in purchasing it. The car's license plate was registered to yet another missing person, Lonnie Bond of Wilseyville. The gun was registered to Stapley. While in custody, Lake admitted his real identity and that of his accomplice, Ng. He then asked for a pencil, a piece of paper, and a glass of water. Left alone in the interrogation room, Lake wrote a note to his ex-wife, then swallowed a cyanide capsule he had hidden in his jacket. Lake was rushed to a nearby Kaiser hospital. He was pronounced dead on June 6th. Upon further examination of the Honda Prelude, investigators found a bullet hole in the car's roof, along with blood splatter, a stun gun, and several unspent rounds of ammunition. Under the passenger seat, a utility bill was found in the name of Lake's ex-wife, with a Wilseyville address. On June 4th, San Francisco police detectives and Wilseyville sheriff investigators searched the Wilseyville cabin with Paula's permission. In one of the bedrooms, they discovered video equipment belonging to Harvey Dubbs, who had vanished from his San Francisco apartment along with his wife Deborah and their infant son Sean in July of 1984. Investigators also found vehicles belonging to Bond and Stapley parked on the property. Bond had rented a house just 50 yards from the Lake's cabin with his girlfriend Brenda O'Connor and their infant son. Stapley, a friend of Bond's, had also been staying at the house. Detectives found the house empty and rent unpaid for several months. Next to the driveway stood a cinder-block bunker that Lake had constructed. Inside the bunker, investigators found a copy of The Collector, as well as tools, handcuffs, women's clothing, and makeup. In his teenage years, Lake had read the 1963 John Fowles novel called The Collector, which tells the story of a man who captures a woman named Miranda and keeps her as a slave in the hope she would eventually fall in love with him. Lake was fascinated by this novel and used the book as inspiration for what he called Operation Miranda. Posted on a wall was a list of typewritten rules for female captives to follow, along with pictures of 21 women in all stages of undress. Behind one wall, through a hidden door, was a tiny windowless prison cell, with a small mattress and a bucket that was used for a toilet. In a makeshift burial site nearby, police unearthed roughly 45 pounds of buried and crushed human bone fragments, corresponding to a minimum of 11 bodies. They also found a hand-drawn treasure map, leading them to 2 buried 5-gallon buckets. One contained envelopes with names and victims' identifications, suggesting that the total number of victims might be as high as 25. In the other bucket were Lake's handwritten journals for the years of 1983 and 1984, and 2 videotapes documenting the torture of 2 of their victims. In both of the videos, Ng and Lake are both seen taunting their victims, telling them that they could cry all they like, but it won't do them any good, taunting that if they go along with them that they'll let them live. At one point in the video, one of the victims is shown being assaulted so severely that she did not survive the encounter. After fleeing the lumber yard, Ng arrived at Bala's residence and told her that he had to leave town immediately. Ballas drove him to San Francisco International Airport, where he boarded a flight to Chicago, using the alias Mike Kamado. A friend of Ng drove him from Chicago to Detroit and across the border to Canada. He eventually settled in Calgary, Alberta, where he lived undetected in a lean-to in Fish Creek Providence Park, until his penchant for theft did him in yet again. On July 6, 1985, he was arrested in Calgary after shooting a security guard named Sean Doyle in the hand, while resisting arrest for stealing a can of salmon from the Hudson's Bay department store. He was charged and in December 1985 convicted of shoplifting, assault with a weapon, and possession of a concealed firearm, and was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he remained incarcerated pending an extradition request from California authorities. Ng fought a legal battle against extradition on the grounds that Canada, which did not have the death penalty for most offenses, would be violating the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms by permitting him to stand trial in California for capital murder. Canada deported Ng to California 18 minutes after the ruling. In February 1999, Ng was convicted of 11 of the 12 homicides: 6 men, 3 women, and 2 male infants. Ng was sentenced to death, and the presiding judge rejected a motion to reduce his sentence to life imprisonment.